whenever you are.
Okay, am I using it?
Yep.
Do you want to tell everybody? Yeah.
Okay.
Hello, what? That battery?
No, should be.
Hello, everybody. Thank you all for coming in this wonderful day. I know some of us trucked down from Albany and looks like Rochester, so thank you all so much for making the trip and being part of our public hearing. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Kelly Owens. I'm the Executive Director of the New York State Office for the Prevention of Domestic Violence. I'll let my team introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jara Traina. I'm OPDV's General Counsel. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, everybody. My name is Elizabeth Bliss, and I'm the Deputy Executive Director for OPDV's Bureau of Prevention and Programming.
Hello, I'm Katie Gordon. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of External Affairs.
And we have Jackie over there, and we have Marlo, and we have Clark, and Stevie someplace.
Downstairs.
Okay. OPDV is in the house. So let me tell you a little bit about us. If you don't know who we are a small but mighty state agency. Our job is to advise the governor, the legislature, and our sister state agencies on how to deliver domestic violence services in the best way possible in the state of New York. Over the past couple of years, we've included all forms of gender-based violence as part of that work, because you can't talk about one without talking about the other. And we've also put a lens to our work and encourage our sister state agencies to put a lens to their work, that the work needs to be survivor-centered, trauma-informed, and culturally responsive. So we are here today to listen to you, and we are really going to listen. We're not going to ask you questions. We're not going to do all that stuff. So take your full 5 minutes. 5, right, Clark? Yes. Take your full 5 minutes. The clock is looming. I'm glad I can't see it. But why are we here? Because our model policy has not been updated in many, many years. In fact, at our last public hearing, we found out that people didn't even know it existed. So our work has changed over the past 25 years, and the way we look and the way we think we should be working with survivors and victims of domestic and gender-based violence has significantly changed. And the partners who need to be at the table is broader than we thought 25 years ago. So we're here to look at the county model policy, and it's going to be a long process for us. We're going to take it very seriously, engage you and all stakeholders in the process as we think about what that looks like for the next couple of years, because we're never going to wait this long again to look at model policy. So that's what we're here to do today. If there are things that you want to talk about outside of that, within your 5 minutes, we're happy to do that. We will also hang out afterwards if there are other things that you all want to talk about for at least 10 or 15, 20 minutes. So we're going to go ahead and get right to it.
All right, first up we have Jennifer Friedman, Senior Program Director of Family Law Project and Policy at Sanctuary for Families.
Ooh, you just took about 10 seconds off my time. I have to introduce myself now, right?
Good afternoon. I'm who he just said I was. Sanctuary for Families is New York State's largest nonprofit organization dedicated to serving and advocating on behalf of survivors of domestic violence and related forms of gender-based violence. Sanctuary's 260 staff are spread across 11 offices and shelters in all 5 boroughs of New York City. We provide a holistic range of shelter, clinical, legal, and economic empowerment services that reach over 9,000 adults and children each year. The 1998 Model DV policy is an impressive document that largely stands the test of time in its description of best practices, types of interventions, and systems impacting survivors. In reading it, I realized that it was developed by the most forward-thinking pioneers of today's movement, and I recognize many of them as my former colleagues. Its foundational principle of a coordinated community response is still a central tenet of our work today. The guiding principles: victim safety and self-determination, abuser accountability, systems responsibility, and coordinated response grounded in the standard of zero tolerance remain our core precepts. Sanctuary believes that this policy does not require exactly a complete overhaul, but rather should be updated to reflect new and emerging issues, populations, and challenges. The following are the key areas in which we believe the model policy must be updated. First, significant policy reforms. Advances in critical areas such as child welfare policy and expanded legal protections for LGBTQIA+ survivors must be incorporated. Second, advances in research. Brain science research has greatly increased our understanding of trauma and its effects on survivors, leading to a core principle that services must be trauma-informed. Groundbreaking research into DV homicides has focused service providers and law enforcement on evidence-based lethality factors. Extensive evidence reveals the links between restrictions on reproductive rights and gender-based violence. Third, addressing the related, interconnected forms of abuse beyond DV alone, collectively defined as gender-based violence. Indeed, many survivors of DV have experienced poly-victimization, including sexual abuse and trafficking, often dating back to childhood. Manifestations of abuse also vary widely in different ethnic and cultural communities, including forced marriage and female genital mutilation. Broadly, there has also been increasing recognition of femicide as its own category of homicide. Fourth, sexual assault, specifically on college campuses. Despite long-standing Title IX protections against sex discrimination, young survivors on campus have shockingly limited legal protections. Fifth, service provision to immigrants. There has been extensive growth in the legal remedies available to immigrant victims since 1998, such as U visas and T visas, VAWA self-petitions, and gender-based asylum claims. While many of these remedies are sadly and unfortunately under attack right now, we fervently hope that they will survive and be available in the future. Given the current climate, we must also develop best practices in working with immigrants facing deportation and detention. Sixth, technology-facilitated abuse. From non-consensual dissemination of sexual images to harassment to identity theft, there are today limitless ways abusers can intimidate and traumatize victims remotely. Seventh, criminalized and incarcerated survivors. Sanctuary has a growing program in this area, recognizing that the significant majority of incarcerated women are survivors of gender-based violence. Finally, many of the systems described in the 1998 policy remain today in dire need of reform. Family court tops that list. The judiciary has simply not kept pace with advances in the field, such as the understanding of coercive control and lethality. As a result, judges fail to understand the dynamics of ongoing litigation abuse in their own courtrooms and continue to issue orders with dangerous child custody and visitation arrangements. The family courts are woefully under-resourced and lack trauma-informed safety protocols. There are simply too few judges to handle the court's massive dockets. Comprehensive training is crucial. Ultimately, any model DV policy will only work if the resources are in place to support it. Our services are critically underfunded. We have consistently advocated for reforms to the needlessly complex and stingy shelter reimbursement system, increased funding for housing subsidy programs, and equitable wages for victim service workers, including COLAs. Thank you.
If you got more, Jennifer, go.
I have 2 sentences.
Finish it.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. We look forward to an ongoing collaborative process in which OPDV works collaboratively with the service provider community to update the model policy. Thank you.
All right, and next up we have Karen Blumenfeld, Student Ambassador for Kira's Champions.
Good evening, Commissioner Owens, General Counsel Trina, Deputy Executive Director Bliss, Deputy Executive Director Gordon, and all members of the OPDV team. Before I begin, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I'm grateful for the work you do, for your willingness to listen to the voices of community members and organizations, and for allowing someone like me, a teenager, to stand here and share my perspective. It's humbling to be in front of people who are role models for me and for so many other young people. But I'm not just here to express gratitude. I'm here to confront you with a reality that is as terrifying as it is true. I need to ask you a difficult question. What if the worst thing in the world was happening right now? What if it was not hypothetical? What if it wasn't a headline or a statistic or someone else's tragedy? What if a child was being beaten, sexually assaulted, or emotionally destroyed by the very parent who was supposed to protect them? What if it was me, a 16-year-old girl being beaten, raped, or emotionally destroyed, not by a stranger, but by my own parent? What if it was your own child? Would it then be enough? What if the only thing standing between that child and safety was a policy you have the power to change? What if you knew it was happening and you had the power to stop it? Because this is the position you are in right now, today, at this very second. And this is the position children in New York face every day, and yet here I am. Updating New York's county-level policies isn't just procedural, it is urgent. It is life-saving. It is the difference between a child being heard and a child being mourned. This is the thin line between a child surviving and a child being sacrificed to a system that looked the other way. My name is Karen Blumenfeld, and I'm 16 years old. I'm proud to be the student ambassador for Kira's Champions, an organization founded in memory of 2-year-old Kira Franchetti, a toddler from my hometown who was murdered by her abusive and dangerous father during a custody case after the court ignored clear warnings of abuse. Kira's death was not an accident. It was a failure. And unless these policies change, that failure will repeat itself again and again and again. Kira never got the protection she deserved. Children across New York still aren't getting it either. I'm here today to ask that you update the policies to protect children in custody cases, to prioritize their safety and mandate all those involved are properly trained in family violence and child abuse, like the policies that are currently in Kira's law. So were my words enough? Will you help protect the next child? And if not, then what will it take? Thank you for your time and compassion.
Next up, we have District Attorney Mary Pat Donnelly, the President of the District Attorneys Association of the State of New York.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm the Rensselaer County District Attorney, and I'm also here on behalf of New York State's 62 DAs. In the more than 25 years since the model policy was drafted, we've learned a lot. So much has changed in terms of our understanding of the cycle of domestic violence, its impact on victims, and again, that we've already talked about, that generational impact on children and families. The goal of a prosecutor is always to seek justice, but in these types of cases, our ability to secure convictions actually save lives. First and foremost, law enforcement and prosecutors need to be aware of the lethality risks and the importance of diligent evidence collection, particularly in strangulation cases, which tend to be the hallmark of domestic violence. We recommend the model policy include mandated training for all providers about the nuances of handling these cases. Injury associated with strangulation can be challenging to prove, and access to medical forensic examination should be an essential component of responding to DV calls. In many DV cases, we have little to no medical evidence to support allegations of violence, which not only impedes our ability to prove our case, but it also makes evidence-based prosecution nearly impossible. I'll shift a little bit and talk about the criminal procedure law of New York State, which was significantly amended in 2020. The new law provides requirements for disclosure that require us to turn over victim contact information very early in the prosecution. There's also a right within that new law that allows the offender to petition the court for an opportunity to visit the crime scene, which in intimate partner violence cases can often be a bedroom or a home of the victim. We really need to make sure that prosecutors and law enforcement in general understand that this information really should be turned over after a protective order is sought from the court. Not that most prosecutors don't know that that's an option, but I think it really needs to be part of the model policy so that we can actually immediately allow our victims to understand that option, so that's going to enhance their willingness to trust us and move forward with the case. Body-worn cameras. Just 7 years ago, they were a new thing. Now, almost every law enforcement officer, even in my small county in upstate New York, wears a body camera. So when they're responding to a case for a DV call in an emergency, obviously they're going to be wearing a camera. We need to talk about the situation where they're dealing with a victim thereafter for follow-up investigation, or when a victim comes on their own to a police station to report abuse. It is our belief that there should not be use of body camera at that point because it can be very humiliating for the victim. Additionally, we can't unring the bell. Once that footage is created, we have to turn it over. We can utilize the courts to attempt to get a protective order, but it is certainly going to be much better for the victim if they do not exist in the first place. In preparing for this testimony, we learned of a situation in another county where a victim went to the police station to report abuse, indicated to the officers that she had some bruising on her thighs. She was encountered with a male investigator equipped with a body camera who handed her a bed sheet and instructed her to hide her intimate parts, lower her pants so that he could photograph with his body camera those bruises. Now, I do believe that officer probably thought he was doing the right thing by making a record. That's why there needs to be guidance. Coming from upstate, I can tell you there's not a lot of uniformity with police agencies, so we need to have these types of directives so that they understand the tenuous nature of dealing with these types of victims. That body camera should never have been on in the first place. Taking those pictures in a different environment could have had a much different result. And again, at the end of the day, what that's doing is re-traumatizing our victims so they don't want to cooperate with us. Child advocacy centers. The overlap between child abuse and DV is often overlooked. I'm fortunate in my county to have a CAC, but we don't see them in every county. I really wish that we did. Where possible, we should always be using that CAC to interview a child witness witness to domestic violence, to again make sure they're trauma informed, make sure it's a trained forensic examiner. This is the best way to keep that child talking, telling the truth, being comfortable with the prosecutor. Material witness orders. These should be used only in very, very rare cases. This is a situation where the DA's office actually holds a victim in custody to compel their testimony. I've been confronted with that option. I've never used it, but we really need to make sure that everyone understands that should only be used in a really dire situation where there is a very high likelihood of conviction of a very dangerous individual and that there's absolutely no other option. And I think we should be specific enough to say the DA themselves should have to sign off on the use of that order. I see my time is up. I have just one more topic I'd like to talk about quickly is the guns being used in domestic violence cases. Obviously, that is a growing problem that we're seeing as younger and younger people are being in possession of these weapons. Extreme risk protection orders. They're very misunderstood. This is something that was put forth to allow us to say someone is at risk in their home because someone either lawfully or unlawfully has a gun. We need to make sure law enforcement understands that the ERPO is a tool that can be used and that they should be evaluating every DV situation in terms of access to, even if it is a lawful possession of a gun. You have my written testimony which expounds on all of these topics, and I really appreciate you listening. I think everything that I have put forth today really comes down to the same topic, to trying to keep it victim-centered so that we're not traumatizing them during a prosecution, because their cooperation is key to getting those convictions that we need. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Next up, we have Tan Hyatt, Manager of Advocacy and Impact Strategy at Saki for South Asian Survivors.
Good afternoon. My name is Tan Hyatt, and I'm the Manager of Advocacy and Impact Strategy at Saki for South Asian Survivors. For 36 years, Saki has been New York's leading organization working with South Asian and Indo-Caribbean survivors of gender-based violence. Thank you for this opportunity to inform the update to the model policy. The original 1998 policy was foundational and visionary for its time, but 27 years later, we now understand much more about GBV and its complex effects. We now understand the neurobiological impacts of trauma, we recognize the intersectionality of GBV, and we're seeing in real time how technology is rapidly creating new forms of abuse. Most critically, we've learned that awareness alone doesn't translate to effective response, which is why survivors in immigrant communities continue to fall through the cracks. In South Asian communities, 48% experience physical violence, and 85% of South Asian women between the ages of 18 and 34 in New York State report experiencing some form of sexual assault in their lifetimes. Yet 52% of South Asians across the U.S. report never seeking help, and 88% didn't even believe seeking assistance was necessary. This isn't because violence isn't happening. It's because current systems aren't designed to reach these communities effectively. When a South Asian survivor presents to county services, that provider needs to understand that 26% of this population experiences immigration-related violence where their visa status is weaponized, 19% experience violence from in-laws and extended family members that standard intake forms don't capture, and that language access across dozens of South Asian languages requires cultural context, not just translation. Counties alone cannot develop this expertise. They must partner with organizations like Sucky that have decades of community trust, language capacity, and cultural knowledge. Culturally responsive organizations must be partners in developing protocols from the beginning, not consulted with after tragedy has already happened. Culturally responsive practice means understanding the full context that survivors navigate. Our clients regularly tell us that they feel supported by our staff when facing abusers in court, while community and family members stand in the hallways pressuring them not to create embarrassment for the family. That pressure to protect family honor, to avoid community shame, is invisible to a system that wasn't designed with these communities in mind. This means assessment protocols that capture immigration-related coercion, extend family abuse, community barriers, not just standard GBV questions. It means trauma-informed response that recognizes how immigration experiences, encounters with law enforcement in home countries and here in the US, and cultural attitudes about family privacy shape survivors' trauma responses. It means language access across dozens of languages, not just the most standard ones. And it means recognizing forms of abuse that the 1998 policy couldn't anticipate. GPS tracking, digital harassment across borders, credit sabotage that can be devastating for survivors dependent on visas, and the ever-increasing use of AI for harm. I'd also like to address intergenerational trauma. While the 1998 policy acknowledges that children witness violence, it doesn't address how trauma can transmit across generations. Studies show that 41% of South Asian adults witness parental violence as children. Children who witness or experience violence are statistically much more likely to go on to either experience or even perpetrate violence in adulthood. Breaking these cycles requires culturally responsive early interventions and understanding how these experiences shape how young people process trauma. The updated model policy needs clear guidance on partnership, formal MOUs, funded contracts for training and consultation, inclusion of community organizations and multidisciplinary teams as core partners, and evaluation with disaggregated data by race, ethnicity, and immigration status that can track language access and incorporates community feedback. Organizations like ours can offer decades of expertise in what works. We speak the languages, we understand the cultural dynamics, and have earned decades of trust in the community. We know how to train county personnel on immigration-related coercion, cultural barriers to reporting, and community-specific safety planning. There are many such culturally responsive GBV organizations across New York City and state. The difference between 1998 and 2025 is this: moving from awareness to action, from acknowledgement to partnership, from should coordinate to actual coordination that includes culturally specific organizations as essential partners. We stand ready to work with OPDV and counties statewide. Organizations like ours are not just stakeholders, we're subject matter experts whose inclusion determines whether this policy works for the most vulnerable among us. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Right, and next up we'll have Emily Miles, Executive Director at the New York City Alliance Against Sexual Assault.
My printer was not working today. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today for the long overdue update of New York's model domestic violence policy for counties.
As the Executive Director of the New York City Alliance Against Sexual Assault, I speak on behalf of an organization dedicated to ending sexual violence through education, prevention programming, research, and policy advocacy, representing 54 rape crisis programs across New York State. Because sexual violence, domestic violence, coercive control, and stalking are deeply interconnected, the development of this updated model policy is not only timely, it's essential. Survivors today face forms of abuse far more complex than those envisioned in 1998 when the original model policy was released. While that policy established important foundations for coordinated community response, victim safety, and abuser accountability, its revision must now address the realities of 2025, including the profound roles of technology, housing instability, and structural inequity in shaping the risks and lived experiences of survivors. First, because sexual violence is often both a tactic of domestic violence and a distinctive form of harm, it is essential that an updated model policy adopt a holistic approach to the intersections between sexual and domestic violence. Many survivors experience sexual coercion, reproductive coercion, sexual assault, and threats of sexual violence as central components of an abusive relationship. As a result, we strongly recommend a model policy make explicit inclusion of broader forms of gender-based violence, including sexual violence. The lack of coordinated system-based response to sexual violence continues to perpetuate a siloed system of response that is not reflective of the integrated nature of abuse that many survivors experience. This inclusion of sexual violence would allow for stronger training and coordinated opportunities for law enforcement, prosecutors, human service organizations, victim service organizations, college campuses, and so many more. Strong partnerships with rape crisis programs who are experts in forensic exam accompaniment, trauma counseling, and long-term healing should more fully be integrated into response systems. Second, technology-facilitated abuse has become one of the most pervasive and dangerous tools of control in both domestic and sexual violence. Survivors experience a wide range of technology-enabled harms, GPS tracking, stalking software installed on cell phones or tablets, abusive monitoring of shared accounts and devices, identity theft, financial coercion through digital access, and threats involving shared intimate images. These forms of digital abuse are not separate from physical or sexual violence. They often precede, escalate, or accompany them. They often dramatically increase survivors' vulnerability and fear, and often make it difficult for them to seek help or leave an abusive relationship. An updated model policy must explicitly name technology-facilitated abuse as a core form of coercive control and require counties to develop competencies in digital evidence collection, safety planning around compromised devices, and investigation of cyberstalking and technology-enabled sexual violence. This includes stronger interagency collaboration with cybersecurity professionals, victim service experts, and rape crisis programs to ensure survivors receive the support they need in the digital world. Finally, an updated model policy must be shaped through a meaningful and transparent engagement process with survivors and communities. The 1998 policy itself was informed by public comment and broader community dialogue, yet our standards for engagement must now go much further. We look toward OPDV to facilitate structured listening sessions with survivors across the state, compensating survivors for their expertise, and intentionally including communities that have historically been marginalized or harmed by government systems, including immigrant communities, LGBTQIA+ survivors, survivors with disabilities, youth survivors, tribal communities, and culturally specific organizations. A survivor-centered model policy must be co-created with those who navigate these systems every day. This engagement will not only strengthen the policy's context, but help ensure that county-level implementation truly aligns with the needs and cultural context of New York's diverse communities. In closing, survivors deserve a model policy that is informed by their voices, grounded in a modern understanding of domestic and sexual violence, and responsive to the realities of life in 2025, where technology permeates every aspect of life and abuse, where housing is a matter of life and death, and where community-based expertise must be valued as central to systems change. Thank you for your leadership and ensuring survivors and communities are meaningfully involved in shaping this critical policy.
Thank you.
Right, and next up, we'll have Bridget Lee with the Weinberg Center for Elder Justice.
afternoon. My name is Bridget Lee, and I'm here on behalf of the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Center for Elder Justice at the Hebrew Home at Riverdale. We are the nation's first elder abuse shelter and a specialized safe haven for older adults experiencing harm. For more than 2 decades, we've stepped in where systems fall short, filling the gaps that too often leave older survivors with nowhere to turn. At the Weinberg Center, our work is built around a coordinated, multidisciplinary response where attorneys, social workers, medical professionals, public health specialists, and community partners work together on every case. We appreciate OPDV's commitment to updating the model domestic violence policy for counties, and we share the same goals. Policies that are survivor-centered, trauma-informed, and culturally responsive. As this policy is modernized, we encourage OPDV to explicitly include older survivors of mistreatment and exploitation within their domestic violence frameworks. Older adults experience domestic violence at significant rates, but remain some of the least visible survivors. According to the CDC, elder abuse is an intentional act or failure to act that causes or creates a risk of harm to an older adult. Globally, it is estimated that 1 in 6 older adults experience some form of elder abuse each year. Abuse in later life often involves intimate partners, adult children, grandchildren, or caregivers, otherwise known as the very people older adults depend on for daily needs, medical care, and housing. This complexity leads to only 1 of 24 incidents being reported to a government agency or a community-based service provider. This is why many older adults fall through the cracks when county policies don't clearly name them or outline how to respond. A major reason older survivors remain invisible is ageism. Ageism shapes how abuse in later life is interpreted or oftentimes dismissed. Harm that would raise immediate red flags for a younger person is often brushed off as confusion, family stress, or a part of aging when it involves an older adult. Those assumptions make it harder for professionals to identify abuse, harder for older adults to be believed, and harder for them to get help. Naming ageism directly in the updated policy would go a long way towards shifting those patterns. When reviewing the current model domestic violence policy for counties, the term elder abuse appears only twice, without definition of what constitutes elder abuse, no discussion of risk factors or red flags, and only 1 outdated incidence rate appears within the policy recommendations. The sole reference to older survivors of domestic violence narrowly focuses on increased risk for substance abuse rather than the broader experiences and complex needs of older survivors of domestic violence. This lack of meaningful acknowledgement further perpetuates the invisibility of older adults and contributes to the continued disregard for older adult survivors. As OPDV updates the model domestic violence policy, we encourage the inclusion of older adults throughout the policy, not just in one section, but woven into definitions, risk factors, identification protocols, training expectations, and interagency coordination. Domestic violence in later life has distinct dynamics, and county agencies need clear guidance on how to recognize and respond to abuse that occurs within caregiving or dependency relationships. This is also where a multidisciplinary approach is essential, the only perspective that consistently captures the medical, legal, safety, financial, and caregiving pieces that shape an older survivor's life. New York State has already recognized this by supporting the creation of an elder abuse multidisciplinary team in every county. The updated domestic violence policy should direct professionals to actively seek out these teams and other local multidisciplinary resources with specialized expertise when responding to elder abuse situations. Older adult and elder justice-specific resources, spanning the arenas of caregiving, healthcare, benefits and insurance, housing, legal, therapeutic, and case management service, fill in knowledge gaps, strengthen coordination, and offer perspective that no single agency can provide on its own. Counties should be encouraged to leverage the full range of support that older adult-specific resources provide, especially in situations involving dependency, complex family dynamics, or cognitive decline. Elder justice shelters, including ours at the Weinberg Center, are a growing movement across the state and county, working closely with local frontline professionals in domestic violence, aging, and medical spaces to provide safe haven alongside comprehensive support services. Counties should be encouraged to seek these elder justice shelters out whenever possible to collaborate with them when older adults need safety, planning, or temporary shelter, even to consider using local resources to create this service where none exists. And importantly, older survivors themselves must be centered in this work. Counties should have room to incorporate restorative or community-based approaches when survivors want them, alongside more traditional justice avenues. Thank you for the opportunity to share these recommendations. Older adults are present in every community in New York, and they deserve to be fully seen and protected within county domestic violence systems. Updating this policy is a crucial step, and we look forward to continuing to support the state, counties, and service providers however we can.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Joan Gerhard, Director of Public Policy and Advocacy at the New York State Coalition Against Domestic Violence.
Shorty. Hello, thank you for the opportunity today. The New York State Coalition Against Domestic Violence is a statewide nonprofit comprised of local domestic violence service providers and allies committed to preventing and ending domestic violence. We serve as the information clearinghouse, primary point of contact, and resource center on domestic violence for the state of New York. NYSCDF appreciates this opportunity to provide testimony at this public hearing, one of two OPDV has scheduled to obtain feedback about the model policy. DV advocates see significant value in the existence of the policy. When local responses fall short, whether services are inadequate, not survivor-centered, or not trauma-informed, advocates can use the policy as a reference to guide improvements. We know in the past domestic violence advocates have used the model policy to hold local systems accountable. OPDV is required by law to convene a task force of stakeholders to develop this policy, hold public hearings around the state, and obtain feedback on the draft before finalizing it. When developing the first policy in the 90s, OPDV did this and more. It convened a task force of 28 members, including NYSCDF, DV programs, and representatives from many local systems. The task force sent a survey to county governments for information, and OPDV held 6 community forums where the policy was reviewed. Then the draft policy was circulated for public comment before the task force finalized it. More than 10 years later, the policy was updated. OPDV again convened a task force. There were regional convenings. A draft of the updated policy was circulated to some reviewers. They looked at what was missing, what was inaccurate, and whether the draft was sufficiently inclusive of marginalized communities. And we know there was at least one in-person meeting at the time. The policy was expanded with 3 new chapters and a focus on communities rather than counties. And the resulting document and its associated resources were published on OPDV's website. OPDV's earlier efforts on the policy serve as a strong example of the value of comprehensive engagement. By bringing together advocates and systems professionals from multiple sectors, OPDV ensured that the policy addressed the needs of survivors, supported practitioners in their roles, and encouraged cross-system collaboration. Despite that work, many DV advocates and stakeholders today aren't aware of the earlier policies. To help rectify this, OPDV has agreed to join NYSCDF at a webinar for DV advocates to learn more about the earlier work. OPDV has also agreed to host more public hearings early next year, which is wonderful. This, however, isn't enough. What we know about domestic violence, the tactics being used, the best practices for response and prevention have changed dramatically in recent years. As such, NYSCDF urges OPDV to follow a comprehensive stakeholder engagement plan similar to what was conducted in 1998. Actively involving diverse voices early and throughout the process will strengthen the policy's content and foster buy-in, enhance collaboration, and increase the likelihood of successful implementation statewide. This means the convening of a new task force, as is statutorily required. A majority of the task force should be DV advocates and DV survivors. Other community-based organizations, systems professionals, and state agency representatives should participate. The task force should meet in person to identify its goals and determine the stakeholder engagement process to be followed. The task force should also circulate an updated survey to counties and systems professionals to obtain information about current practices and policies. And the task force should convene a series of meetings around the state to review the draft policy update and obtain feedback. Equally critical are the voices of domestic violence survivors, including those who have been criminalized and those who are or have been incarcerated. They bring firsthand knowledge of the challenges, gaps, and barriers within existing systems that cannot be fully understood through professional or institutional perspectives alone. It is therefore incumbent upon OPDV and the task force to identify specific opportunities for DV survivors to participate. Finally, NYSCDIV also intends to gather feedback from DV advocates across the state regarding the state's response to DV in local communities. These advocate-only convenings will provide a safe space for participants to share insights, identify systemic gaps, and discuss challenges based on their direct experiences. This feedback will ensure that the perspectives of those closest to the work inform policy decisions, strengthen implementation strategies, and help the task force and OPDV create a model that is responsive, practical, and truly survivor-centered. We look forward to sharing this information with OPDV as it's collected. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan.
Next up, we have Kumari Francis.
I'm a little nervous, so thank you all for having me. Thank you, Naomi NYC, for giving me this opportunity to speak today. My name is Kumari Francis, and I am a motivational speaker, a NAMI NYC Advocacy Ambassador, a peer advocate with Goodwill Pal Program, and the founder of Becoming Stronger. But before I held any of those titles, I was a young girl trying to survive circumstances no child should ever face. I was born in Trinidad, the ninth of 11 children, into deep poverty. When I was 14, my mother told me I could no longer live at home, and her answer was for me to get married. Everything I knew about life came from the Indian movies we watched, but something inside me refused to believe that my destiny was to marry a stranger. The man chosen for me quickly showed me his true self. He beat me with a cable wire and held a broken piece of mirror to my neck. On the third night, terrified but determined, I ran. I lived from place to place until my mother realized the danger and took me away from him. At 15, I started working in restaurants and bars. That's where I met an older man who brought me to America. But once I arrived, I realized I was living the life of a mistress. I knew I wanted better for myself, and I entered foster care until I turned 18. When given the choice to stay in the US or return to Trinidad, I chose to go home. I missed my family and I wanted to help, but when I returned, poverty was worse. My brother struggled with mental illness. My father battled alcoholism. I felt like a stranger in my own home. Still, I pushed forward. I worked hard, learned businesses and tailoring, and eventually I fell in love. I married, hoping for stability, but the abuse began again. We later moved to America and the abuse continued. This time, I left for my 2 daughters. Safe Horizon supported me with housing, counseling, and legal services. For the first time, I could see a pathway forward. Later, I remarried, and I had my 3rd daughter, but that relationship also became abusive. I was dealing with postpartum depression and PTSD when my husband broke my nose. I tried to hide it. I even lied to the doctor. But when I look at my swollen, bruised face. Something in me changed. I realized I had to protect myself. I called the police. I took my power back. My fourth daughter became my turning point. Carrying her reminded me of my purpose. I focused on healing, raising my girls, furthering my education, and working towards citizenship. I supported my daughter's dreams. One graduated college, my two younger pursued singing, and my youngest made it to The Voice NBC, season 26, choosing Snoop Dogg as her coach. After the show, she applied to NYU and was accepted into Clive Davis Institute on a full scholarship. Today I stand before you as a survivor, a mother, and an advocate. My journey shapes the way I support others, those dealing with trauma, instability, and mental health challenges. I understand their courage. I understand what it means to fight for a life beyond survival. I use my voice for every person who feels trapped, silent, or forgotten. I am living proof that no matter where you start, and no matter what you have endured, you can rise, and you can rebuild, and you can become stronger. Thank you all.
Thank you, Tamari. Thank you for your courage.
All right, next up we have Lenore Schaefer, Chief Program Officer at Restore NYC.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. My name is Lenore Schaefer, and I serve as the Chief Program Officer at Restore NYC. At Restore, we are a small but mighty nonprofit that provides trauma-informed services to survivors of human trafficking across all 5 boroughs. Restore has served survivors for around 16 years and has supported close to 3,000 survivors and individuals at risk through our housing, economic empowerment, client services, and resource coordination programs. Our work places us in regular collaboration with law enforcement, healthcare providers, the Department of Social Services Human Resources Administration, the Department of Homeless Services, the Mayor's Office to End Gender-Based Violence, and many community-based providers across New York City, many of whom are here today. In 2024, we received the Presidential Award for Extraordinary Efforts to Combat Trafficking in Persons, which recognizes the impact of our survivor-centered programming and our contribution to national best practices. I want to begin by expressing gratitude for OPDV's commitment to a broader, survivor-centered understanding of gender-based violence. This shift matters deeply. Trafficking is a form of gender-based violence, and the survivors we serve reflect that reality every day. Many experience intimate partner violence and trafficking at the same time. At Restore, 35% of the survivors we work with were trafficked by an intimate partner. Their experiences do not fall neatly into one category, and their needs show how closely these forms of harm are intertwined. Survivors of trafficking move between the same systems that counties rely on when responding to domestic violence. They encounter law enforcement's need a coordinated and informed response. Although the model policy is not a step-by-step manual, it establishes the principles that guide identification, screening, safety planning, and coordinated response across county systems. When trafficking is not included in this foundational document, survivors fall through the cracks because counties are not directed to recognize or respond to their experiences. Although my colleague Gabrielle Massey will speak more specifically about emergency housing, I want to highlight why this gap is so important from a policy perspective. Trafficking survivors often cannot access general shelters or DV shelters because criteria do not align with their situation. Some are not considered eligible because the trafficking they experience is not classified as domestic violence or under current rules. Others have been located by their traffickers in the past and cannot safely return to a congregate shelter environment. Counties are left with no clear guidance on how to respond in these situations because trafficking is not reflected anywhere in the current policy. But the gap extends beyond housing. When trafficking is not explicitly included, systems miss survivors of trafficking in plain sight. Healthcare providers may screen for intimate partner violence, but not for trafficking indicators. Law enforcement may intersect with someone experiencing exploitation, but not identify them without clear protocols. Child welfare may intervene without recognizing that a parent is being trafficked and needs specialized safety planning and additional support. DSS may process applications for benefits without understanding the coercion, financial abuse, or documentation challenges that trafficking survivors often face. These are not abstract concerns. They are patterns we see every week. Survivors are interacting with multiple county systems, but those systems lack shared definitions, screening practices, and coordinated response pathways that reflect the realities of trafficking. Without explicit inclusion in the model policy, counties are left to navigate these gaps on their own, which leads to inconsistent practices and missed opportunities for safety. The update to the policy presents a rare and meaningful opportunity. The policy has not been formally updated since 1998. As OPDV works to modernize it, this is the moment to ensure that trafficking is integrated throughout the document. This includes its guiding principles, screening and identification guidance, system-specific sections, cross-agency coordination expectations. These updates will help counties respond quickly and safely when a trafficking survivor seeks help. Including trafficking will strengthen the model policy. It aligns with OPDV's gender-based violence framework, reflects the realities counties are already seeing, and ensures that survivors of trafficking who face similar levels of coercion, danger, and harm as survivors of domestic violence are meaningfully included in New York State's coordinated response. We appreciate OPDV's leadership in taking on this long overdue update and your commitment to building a coordinated response that recognizes and protects all survivors across our state. Thank you.
Thank you.
And next up, we'll have Gabrielle Massey, Director of Client Services at Restore NYC.
Good afternoon. My name is Gabrielle Massey. I'm the Director of Client Services at Restore NYC. In this role, I oversee a team that provides case management, clinical counseling, crisis intervention, and resource coordination for survivors of human trafficking. Every day we support survivors who are attempting to exit exploitation and seek safety, yet they encounter significant barriers in doing so. I want to focus my testimony on one of the clearest places where the model domestic violence policy for counties falls short when trafficking is not included, which is emergency housing. Housing is the most urgent need for the survivors we serve. Restore receives an average of more than 400 referrals each year, and housing, whether emergency, transitional, or permanent, continues to be the most frequently requested service. Last year, 53% of new clients identified housing as their primary concern during intake. Currently, there are no emergency beds specifically designated for trafficking survivors. Survivors often cannot safely enter general homeless shelters because traffickers have previously located them in those settings, or because the environment poses serious safety and privacy risks. They also cannot always access domestic violence shelters. Some are deemed ineligible because the trafficking they've experienced does not fall under domestic violence criteria. Others are turned away because shelters are full or because wait lists are long. Some shelters do not maintain wait lists at all and require survivors to call back each day to check for openings, something that is nearly impossible for a survivor who is actively fleeing. Also to add that it is really impossible for a survivor to continuously have to repeat their stories every time they're doing an intake just to be told that there are no beds. At Restore, we sometimes place survivors in a short hotel stay that we fund for 5 to 7 days. That support provides immediate safety, but it rarely leads to a stable next step. Over the last 3 years, Restore received 260 emergency housing requests and was able to safely place 31 survivors, providing a total of 446 nights of emergency shelter. These placements save lives. But without county level guidance on trafficking, there is no consistent pathway forward after those first few nights. I want to share one story that captures how these gaps play out. A young woman fled her trafficker after months of escalating abuse. She could not go to a general shelter because her trafficker had previously found her in one. We placed her in a hotel immediately to ensure her safety. Even with the support from our team, every step after that became a barrier. Shelters were full. Eligibility criteria did not align with her situation. She didn't have children. She didn't qualify for domestic violence beds, or it was very difficult to find a single unit shelter for her. Documentation requirements were rigid. When her hotel stay ended, she had nowhere safe to go. Within weeks, she returned to her trafficker. We often hear, "I'm better off going back than having to live on the street." This was not a failure on her part. It was a failure of a system that was not built with trafficking in mind and does not yet include trafficking within its policies or response pathways. When emergency housing is not available quickly, we often lose contact with survivors. This is not because they do not want help, but because the systems designed to support them cannot meet the needs created by trafficking. Without safe housing, survivors cannot begin safety planning, engage in mental health services, pursue medical care, or take steps forward toward long-term stability. Housing is the foundation for everything else. That is why we are a housing first model at Restore. This is why including trafficking in the model domestic violence policy for counties is essential. Counties need clear guidance on how to screen for trafficking identification indicators, how to offer low barrier emergency responses, and how to coordinate across domestic violence providers, trafficking programs, Department of Social Services, and law enforcement. They also need flexibility on documentation when survivors cannot immediately produce identification or paperwork, and trauma-informed approaches during the first 24 to 72 hours, so survivors can stabilize before going through assessments or detailed intake processes. Counties need pathways for survivors whose experiences do not neatly align with domestic violence categories, yet who still face high levels of danger and coercion. Trafficking survivors are already showing up in county systems across New York. The question is whether those systems will be equipped to recognize and respond to them. Updating the model policy to explicitly include trafficking is an essential step toward ensuring that survivors are not overlooked in moments of the greatest vulnerability. I appreciate OPDV's leadership in taking on this long overdue update and for your commitment to strengthening New York's response to all survivors of gender-based violence. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next, we have Megan Deschatevue, President and CEO of Willow Domestic Violence Center.
Thank you, Clerk, for taking some time from me. Okay, so thank you, everyone. Thanks for listening. Thank you for inviting us to be here today. I want to especially recognize OPDV for your leadership and your willingness to listen to survivors and providers and the DA and everyone that comes forward to speak to you and speak with you and so many different meetings about so many of these issues. So we're grateful to you for continuing to listen and to help us to transform the way that we do this work. So at Willow Domestic Violence Center, we see about 13,000 calls to our hotline every year. That's a triage to our 49-bed emergency shelter. We have 30-plus apartments, court program, counseling, prevention, pets, and our new Family Justice Center. So we are providing services for Monroe County, Rochester, New York. We came here yesterday to be able to speak with you and share what's happening in our community. So our mission is to prevent domestic violence and to champion survivor safety, justice, healing, and hope. Every day, my team and I sit with survivors in their moments of crisis. We are on the hotline, at 2 a.m. We're in shelter with the kiddos. We're at the Family Justice Center as survivors are navigating trauma, legal systems, and impossible choices. Across New York State, we know domestic violence is a public safety and public health crisis, and survivors are telling us very clearly the systems designed to protect them are not keeping pace with their reality. We all know this. The model policy is an important foundation. I agree with a lot of statements that it's not terrible. It just needs some updating. It needs to evolve. It must reflect what survivors actually need right now to stay safe in real time, in real life, in 2025 and beyond. This is our opportunity to move from a system-driven response to a survivor-centered response. So here are the highlights. I wanted to have just 3, but I have 11. We need the survivor-centered response, not system-centered. When survivors reach out, they don't speak in the language of systems. They don't care what silos we have. They don't care which office at the state level is responding or which agency in our community is responding. They just need someone to help them survive. A mother says she needs shelter, but what she truly needs is a security deposit and first month's rent so she can move today. A survivor ready to flee can't leave because they'll lose their job without childcare or transportation. Another calls after hours and says, I'll go anywhere safe, but I can't leave my dog. He's all my kids have. Safety is not just a bed. It's stability, dignity, and the ability to rebuild. Our statewide policy must reflect that. It must embed flexible, rapid response, financial assistance, relocation support, housing navigation, childcare, and essential mental health services. Our policies must match what survivors tell us they need to survive and heal and thrive. 2, judicial accountability. Big one. Closing one of the most dangerous gaps. So there is a critical gap in our current response, and it lies within our courts. I echo what Jennifer said earlier about the family court. We experienced that upstate as well. Across the state, we are seeing violent offenders released on recognizance, even when they have histories of strangulation, weapons use, stalking, or escalating danger. Not a small issue. It is a life-threatening one. We have survivors, advocates, partners doing everything right. Call, they plan, they testify, they flee, they cooperate. And then the person who harmed them walks out, same day with no safeguards. We urgently need judicial training on domestic violence dynamics, the required use of lethality and risk assessments and bail and release decisions, and clear standards for conditions of release for violent offenders. The safety of survivors should not depend on the luck of which courtroom they walk into that day. Number 3, real offender accountability. Survivors need consistency and predictability in how systems respond, particularly our partners in law enforcement. We need clear primary aggressor identification training, mandatory evidence-based lethality assessments, routine audits of domestic incident reports that include survivor input to ensure accuracy, statewide adoption of the Dale Protocol or something like that, danger assessment for law enforcement. If we want to truly address DV at its roots, we must center the accountability on the person causing harm, not the person surviving it. Number 4, child welfare partnerships, CPS liaisons. So one of the most common fears survivors express to us is this: if I call for help, I will lose my children. We see this over and over and over again, and it's a very real fear. That is silencing thousands. It is a risk people take when they come forward to the system that CPS is part of, that they might lose their children. So we need dedicated CPS domestic violence liaisons in every county, a statewide model like Safety First that centers the abusive partner's behavior, not the non-offending parent's coping strategies. Protecting children begins with supporting their safe parent and with CPS advocates that understand the dynamics of domestic violence and can work with the family, not scaring survivors from seeking help. Number 5, mental health support for children, a huge missing piece of the puzzle. Domestic violence is childhood trauma with lifelong consequences. So we know that children exposed to abuse experience anxiety, depression, PTSD, developmental delays, disrupted schooling. We need dedicated funding and policy expectations for immediate trauma assessment, school-based counseling, long-term therapy, specialized support for children who are impacted by strangulation, stalking, and homicide. Therapeutic groups and age-appropriate interventions, because children deserve more than safety, they deserve healing, and they deserve a chance to break the cycle. Number 6, pets must be included in safety planning and funding. We must acknowledge pets are part of the family, and survivors need shelter options that include animals or partnerships that safely board them. We need funding for care for the pets, food, transport, and temporary placement. Number 7, client assistance money saves lives. Flexible financial assistance is one of the most effective and life-changing tools we have. We utilize funds from OPDV, thank you, every day. We also have private funds that we rely on, and those dollars to support survivors' immediate needs are sometimes they make the biggest difference. They help with emergency housing, transportation, childcare, medical care, clothing, and essentials phone and technology replacement, immediate safety needs. Sometimes something as simple as $200 is the difference between staying in danger or escaping it. And these client assistance funds must be protected, expanded, and streamlined. Number 8, the Roman numerals. I have to take a moment there. Sustained investment in collaboration, because we know domestic violence is not a standalone issue. It intersects with every human service system. Models we have that are working, like the Family Justice Centers, the Child Advocacy Centers, CPS partnerships, high-risk teams, Housing First programs, supervised visitation, all of these show what works when we really collaborate, but collaboration is only as strong as the funding behind it. So we need multi-year stable investments, standardized MOU templates to guide local partnerships. Thank you for the work on the Strive MOUs, that was so helpful. Dedicated capacity building grants, because collaboration should not depend on the yearly grant cycle, it should be built into our design. Number 9. Flexible, streamlined, consistent funding for providers. So we are expected to provide emergency 24/7 life-saving support while navigating inconsistent, inflexible, and administratively heavy funding structures. We need funding that is flexible so each community can invest in what works, reliable, streamlined, and outcome-driven, supporting what we know keeps survivors safer. We cannot help survivors to stabilize with unstable funding. Statewide residential standards, number 10. Every survivor deserves a healing environment that is safe, accessible, and trauma-informed. Creating statewide quality standards paired with funding to meet them ensures survivors receive consistent care regardless of where they live or what their community resources are. And number 11, statewide advocate training. This is happening in other states. There's a required training, a 40-hour certificate in many states where advocates who are the first responders oftentimes of the DV system have a certification process to ensure every survivor receives that high-quality, culturally responsive, trauma-informed support no matter their zip code. So in closing, survivors live in a different reality today than when the model policy was developed. It's a reality shaped by new technologies, we heard about that already, vastly different economic and social pressures, housing shortages, mental health crises, and systems that were not designed for the complexity of our lives now. For those of you who know Harry Potter and Kelly Owens, OPDV Executive Director, Kelly describes our system as something like the Weasley house that was cobbled together with rooms added haphazardly as the needs shifted. Kelly talked about this 10 years ago, the first time I met you. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's the way that our system has been built made sense in the moment, but when you stand back to look at it, it is held together by duct tape and magic. It is time to rebuild, and New York has an opportunity to lead, not with incremental change, but with bold, survivor-centered, trauma-informed policy that reflects who survivors are, what they need, and what really works. Together we can create a New York where survivors are supported, families are protected, offenders are held accountable in real ways, and communities are made stronger. Thank you, OPDV, for your leadership, for listening, for letting me go over time. Appreciate everyone else for that too, and your commitment to this work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, now we have Kelly Coyne, Chief Program Officer at Safe Horizon.
Good evening, everyone. I'm suffering from the cold everyone has, so let's see if I can not cough for 4 minutes and 59 seconds. I'm Kelly Coyne. I'm Safe Horizon's Chief Program Officer, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to provide this testimony today. As many of you know, Safe Horizon, we're the largest victim services organization in the country, serving 250,000 New Yorkers each year. Clients come to us following experiences of physical violence, sexual violence, community violence, emotional abuse, exploitation. We use a lens of racial equity and justice to guide our work with our clients, with one another, and in developing all of the positions that we hold. Our mission, recently updated, is to stand with those who've experienced violence, abuse, and exploitation. I feel really strongly about this part, that we offer unwavering support to our clients and advocate for systemic change. And we envision a world where safety is a universal human right, full stop. We're thankful for the opportunity to be here today and thankful for the leadership in having this conversation. And I think it's important to know for OPDV and the rest of you here that we stand here in partnership with everyone. To prepare for our hearing, we review the model policy for the counties from 1998, the guiding principles of 2015, and there's some good stuff in there, right? Especially the goals of centering victim safety and self-determination. Those things still feel really important today. We believe that The original document is rich because there was an entire task force of people who spent a lot of time together working on the stuff that's in those documents. The issues that we're talking about are complicated. Everyone in this room does not agree on the approach for each one of those things, and we need time to really and truly talk about those things to get to a place that serves our sector, serves our clients, and serves our state. So rather than offer thoughts on each of the systems addressed in the model policy, I thought maybe I'd spend a little bit of time advocating for the process. I'm really inspired by the work that happened in '98 and in 2013, and think we can do even better in a 2026 world. We encourage everyone in this room, including OPDV, to use a process that happened in 1998 and 2013 as a jumping point, as a starting place, and to add to it to see what we can really do and get going. We're advocating for continued collaboration, a really deliberate, bottom-up, community-led process with survivors and advocates, and all stakeholders at the table. It's important to have survivors with recent lived experience navigating the systems of today to inform how those systems could or should address and respond to domestic violence. Simply put, we need spaces for deep dialogues and conversations. We consider today's hearing and the previous November one to be a starting point, and for what we hope will be an advocate and survivor-led process to revisit, refresh, and update the model domestic violence policy for counties. Forums like today are great to hear what everybody's thinking about, but we need time to really process that and sort of get into it. Let's see. This is what happens when I go off script and start using my own words. So survivors' voices are often left out. Oftentimes, other people report about what they're seeing. I have 20 years of experience doing this work, and that's still not the same as a survivor who's going through this today in today's systems. So we really need to bring them into the conversation to lead the conversation. We want to ensure that all survivors, experts, stakeholders, systems, etc., really come together to come up with policies that everyone, so that it works in New York City and it works in Broome County and it works even further up close to the Canadian border. A 2026 task force should be tasked with reviewing and updating those policies. We really want survivors with lived experience and everyone there fully at the table, and quite frankly, to develop a model policy that includes coordinated response will require a coordinated plan to get feedback. Those two things have to work together. A today modern policy should include issues around immigration for both immigrants and non-citizens. Obviously, criminalized survivors need to be included. Really talking about, Emily talked about this, sexual violence, both how it coincides with intimate partner violence and the times that it doesn't. We've got to address housing. Housing is life-saving. Accountability programs, how counties can connect people who have caused harm to resources that center accountability and helping them understand how to heal from their traumas and take responsibility for the harm that they've caused. Must center culturally specific and community-based organizations, and how counties can invest in and better support culturally specific organizations to better address the needs of their communities. Ultimately, counties across the state should invest in programming that both supports systems and solutions outside of systems, so that healing and safety and justice are available to survivors in ways that feel right to them. New York State has the opportunity to lead the nation in this, so I encourage us to pause, go through the process, and let's make New York number one in solving this problem. We look forward to working with the entire team here at OPDV and all the rest of you and those watching. Thanks for the time.
Thank you.
Next, we'll have Felicia Singh, Director of Policy and Government Relations at the Coalition for Asian American Children and Families.
I am Felicia Singh, Director of Policy and Government Relations at the Coalition for Asian American Children and Families, otherwise known as CACF. CACF is the nation's only pan-Asian children and families advocacy organization, bringing together community-based organizations, youth, and allies to fight for equity for Asian American and Pacific Islanders. OPDV's statute requires it to develop a model domestic violence policy for counties. Considering the model policy has not been updated since 1998, this is long overdue. I'm glad to be joined by CACF's member organizations like Seki, Womankind, Jahaji, and Caribbean Equality Project, who will share their experiences supporting survivors and the long road ahead to bringing equity, cultural responsiveness, and care to our diverse communities across the state. An updated model of policy must include a more robust understanding of API communities in New York. Building on a deeper understanding of API communities helps dispel the model minority myth, a myth that achieved a higher level of success than the general population through some combination of innate talent and pull yourselves up by your bootstrap and expand policy to be more inclusive. There's also a need to understand that API New Yorkers are not just East Asians. APIs that include and are not limited to Indo-Caribbeans, the Nepali, Afghan, Armenian, Pakistani, and Bangladeshi communities, to name a few. In New York City alone, APIs are 18% of the population. In fact, our population has doubled since 1990. 71% of Asian New Yorkers are foreign-born, the highest percentage of any racial group in New York. More than half, that's 52% of Asian immigrants, live in Queens, with significant populations also in Brooklyn and Manhattan. Nearly 1 in 4 New Yorkers who are Asian live in poverty. And if you disaggregate that, our Bangladeshi and Pakistani community have the highest rates. The policy model does reference the Asian community on page 15, and it says, and I quote, "It is not feasible for providers to have a comprehensive understanding of the social, cultural, ethnic, or religious affiliations of every victim. It is essential they are prepared to acknowledge and accept these factors may influence an individual's victim's behavior and choices." End quote. It then goes on to provide an example of forced imprisonment of Japanese and other Asian civilians in internment camps, which could cause distrust in government systems. The disregard of understanding social, cultural, ethnic, or religions of every survivor as not feasible is the reason why our community-based organizations are trusted as a safe haven for culturally responsive care over government agencies. Because CBOs, like the many you heard from today, provide language-accessible and culturally responsive services, it is recommended that an updated policy mandate that county agencies work closely with CBOs to do the following. 1, provide integrative and intersectional support to survivors that is non-carceral and centers collective healing. 2, create and build a language justice model that includes both accurate translation and interpretation. CACF has created a community review of translation that is a step-by-step guide on how to do just this work with CBOs and agencies, and I have a copy for you that I'll share with you in a moment. Working with community partners means that funding will be critical for CBOs in order to provide what is an increase in DV services across New York, especially for diverse communities. And lastly, in 2021, CACF led the passing of data disaggregation law, which would mandate agencies, including OPDV, to disaggregate Asian Americans and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders demographic data. Following the law's official enactment in 2022, New York State agencies had over 3 years now to assess the law, determine an implementation plan, and execute upon such plans. OPDV has been rated, according to our implementation, as mid-tier, because you have been unable to provide an example of a form updated to include Asian and NHPI categories. We are urging OPDV to update their forms so that the agency can have accurate information on who it is and is not serving, and we hope that CACF can work with you to do just that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And next up, we'll have Stephanie McGraw, founder of We All Really Matter.
It is such an honor and privilege to be here with you all. My name is Stephanie McGraw. I am the founder and CEO of WARM. And WARM stands for We All Really Matter. It is the leading domestic violence service center right here in the rich historical center and village called Harlem. Actually, our center is right down the block. So I walked here. That's how great this is. So I'm so honored to be here. I'd like to thank the Office of Prevention of Domestic Violence for having this hearing, because I know the richness and connections. You know, I don't know how we're going to ever be able to eradicate domestic violence separately. This is where the real meat and potatoes happen. I don't know not one of you women in here, and that's not good. I shouldn't know you all. I should be able to push a button. I should be able to make a phone call. I should be able to say, you do this. I don't do that. You do this. So thank you for having us. Thank you for having us here and coming all together. So my name is Stephanie McGraw, survivor of domestic violence, a resident of Harlem. I'm the founder of this, and my experience informs me of everything I'm going to talk about today and everything I have experienced. And this model policy of counties, it haven't been revised since 1998, 27 years. That's a long time, but you know, there's no time like the right time, so let's get busy, y'all. So we're a full service organization. We served over 800 survivors annually. We've served over 15,000 through our Love on the Block, because we are that agency in this community that is knee deep, that's boots on the ground, that's cultural centers, and the majority of the women that work at WARM are survivors of domestic violence. So we some good Me Too sisters. So we've been very rich in our approach and how we've been able to deal with domestic violence in this area, right? So we want this committee, this model to include, because we know the understanding of women of color. And if you look at all the statistics, you look at all the records, you look at all the numbers, but I don't even have to tell you to look at them. Ask me, I'll tell you. We see it every day, how poverty, moves victims in a crippling space, right? So we want this model to be able to create and to integrate the holistic approach to healing. We are the first domestic violence organization to create a comprehensive full wraparound services of holistic healing for victims of domestic violence. We offer yoga. We offer somatic experience. The body, we know the issues are stored in the tissues, right? So this center is going to be able to get to them, women, because when in 2006, when I left to go to a domestic violence shelter, I was clueless about how deep my trauma was. I had no understanding about what they're talking about, yoga and meditation. I needed to survive. I needed to eat. I needed to make sure that I was not going to be killed. I didn't know anything about healing, so we want this model to maybe consider meditation and internal family systems, because we know the evidence-based holistic approach about trauma and where it's stored at. We want to be able to offer a cranial sacred. That's what we have at the center. EMDR is a therapeutic approach to help people recover from trauma and PTSD. And I know I went for 5 years for PTSD, and I went to therapy for like 8 years, because that's how deep my trauma is. I grew up in it. 62, I know, still look fabulous, right? Thank God I don't look like nothing I've been through. But everything I've been through is for me to be here to testify, for me to be in my community, for me to tell women, you could go back to school and get your GED at 50. You could go to college and get a college education at 55. You can start a domestic violence center and tell women that that's not the end of your story. Your story is just beginning. But let me get back to the acupuncture that we offer. At the first ever, we were able to receive $600,000 from the federal government with them people in Washington still. You can't stop God's work because it's going down. So we offer all this. We offer massage therapy. So we come here. I ain't say nothing that they told me to write about, because, I'm sorry. It's just, it's in me. I live this. This is my story. I got 16 minutes, 6 minutes that the pressure on. So let me wind out with this. I want to thank you. Maybe I could read a little bit about this, about how this policy we'll be able to address our real serious issues. And we want more inclusiveness, because it's not enough of that. You know, right now, and I work with the police, we're the critical response team. And when we go out to talk to women about domestic violence, don't you know, none of them know that every precinct has a domestic violence unit. We got some work to do, all of us in here. If you're here, you're sitting here, you're charged, they're there, we got work to do, so let's start doing it. And I want to thank the committee again for having me. Now I got to run out to my next event, because we got a family waiting for us at the office. There's a lot going on. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Stephanie.
All right, and next up we'll have Jennifer DeCarly, Deputy Commissioner for Family Justice Centers and Survivor Supports at the Mayor's Office to End Domestic and Gender-Based Violence. Longest title.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Clark, for that really long introduction. It's nice to be here with all of you. Good afternoon, Director Owens, Deputy Director Gordon, and the whole OPDV team. My name is Jennifer DeCarly. I'm a Deputy Commissioner at NGBV, as you just heard, and I'm really happy to be here with all of you and have the opportunity to talk about the model protocol. The state's model domestic violence policy plays a vital role in promoting consistency and coordination among agencies and departments, reflecting best practices responses, and ensuring New York State's response to survivors of domestic and gender-based violence is grounded in best practices. This update provides an important opportunity to reflect how the field has evolved and grown since 1998. And nice fact, I worked on the protocol as a law student back in 1998 and took it to meetings with counties. So I have like a personal kind of investment in this policy too. It ensures the policy reflects the many lessons we've learned in partnership with all of you and with survivors and community-based organizations about how best to support survivors. NGBV, as many of you know, coordinates the delivery of domestic violence and gender-based violence services across agencies, community providers, and stakeholders throughout New York City. So updating this model protocol is directly relevant to the work we do every day in New York City. And although it's been about 30 years since it's been updated, I'm so old now, the policy's guiding principles still broadly reflect best practices as they focus on prioritizing victim safety, self-determination, holding abusers accountable, ensuring systems are responsive to survivors, and uplifting coordinated community responses. As we look to update this guidance, we have to remain committed to centering survivors' needs and voices in our responses, expanding service options that are grounded in trauma-informed and culturally responsive practices, like many of you have discussed, and ensuring that survivors' voices inform our work. And I have a lot of chicken scratch on here because I'm trying to make these shorter. So our first suggestion for updating the policy focuses on the need to update the terminology that's used throughout the protocol to describe who experiences abuse and those that cause harm. The policy notes that most DV victims are women, and it consistently refers to victims only as female and abusers as male, and includes terms such as battered women. So even with references to LGBTQ survivors in the protocol, the language relies on only two gender pronouns. We need to update the policy with gender-neutral and trauma-informed terminology that more accurately reflects the diversity of survivors and people who cause harm. Secondly, we recommend updating the policy section on the diversity of victims' experiences to ensure it fully highlights the myriad of challenges faced by specific groups of survivors, such as immigrant survivors, as many of you have discussed, survivors with disability, older survivors, and LGBTQ survivors. We need to make sure that the survivors with disabilities and may encounter, I'm going to pause for example. For example, the policy states that survivors with disabilities may encounter inadequate services, and LGBTQ survivors may face institutional bias or be forced to disclose their identity when seeking help. We now have new protections under the ADA and the New York City Human Rights Law, and we recommend updating the protocols to reflect those new standards. Okay. Moreover, the policy talks a lot about the role of local police and law enforcement, including connecting survivors to services, but we recommend that the policy also reflect best practices to ensure that survivors can access supports no matter where they look for help, and Kelly talked about this a little bit. We really try to do that here in the city through our work at the Family Justice Centers, but also our work in community. Survivors really should have choice, and we recommend making sure that OPDV recommends the policy reflect that. Turning to housing and shelter. Many of you have talked about housing and shelter, and the policy notes that the goal of interventions with victims is safety from physical harm and other forms of harm, and it does recognize that at times staying with a partner may be the most rational choice.
a victim can make. While we agree with the context of this framing, we really encourage OPDV to update the policy to reflect more safety planning methods and housing options that we have built up and that we would encourage all counties to build up, such as flexible funding methods, which many of you have talked about. We have a Home Plus program that allows survivors to stay safely in their homes if they have a safe home to stay in. The work we've done with HUD around Section 8 vouchers and coordinating rapid rehousing programs, and really ensuring that OPDV is encouraging those creative kind of housing and shelter responses. All right, got 39 seconds and I'm nowhere near done. Okay, turning to prevention and early intervention, the policy notes that batterer intervention programs are most effective when used by the courts in combination with legal sanctions, and that they shouldn't be used for individuals who are not court mandated. While NGBV agrees that there must be programming for those causing harm to be mandated to after an arrest, we also believe it's really important to offer programming for people who cause harm outside of the criminal justice system, especially given that many survivors choose not to engage with systems. NGBV received private funding to do a report that really said that. Survivors said, can you stand up programs so that the person who's harming me can stop harming me and have some place to go to learn how to do that? We now have 2 programs, Respect and Responsibility and Respect First, which are programs that people can go to when they haven't been court mandated. We've seen positive outcomes through this work, which is responsive to survivors who've long been asking for programs that provide an opportunity to reform abusive behavior without having a partner or family member arrested or prosecuted. We recommend updating this section to allow the policy to reflect the range of effective intervention models that exist today, including these programs that were really developed to address the needs of survivors and community-based organizations seeking alternative approaches. And lastly, because I know my time is up, I do want to just further kind of emphasize what many of you have said. We encourage OPDV to urge counties to reflect the broader gender-based violence framework. Our office was established in 2001, and its responsibilities originally focused on intimate partner violence and elder abuse only. In 2018, we expanded to include sexual violence, trafficking, stalking, the broadest range of gender-based violence. And we've also taken over contracts that used to live with our Office of Criminal Justice Services to serve all victims of crime. So as such, our portfolio now includes programs for victims of crimes in addition to programs specifically tailored for domestic violence survivors. This expansion recognizes the connections between domestic violence and gender-based violence and other forms of violence like gun violence, but also ensures our services reflect the lived realities of the individuals we serve, many of whom are dealing with intersecting layers of trauma from multiple experiences of violence. We believe the model policy should be updated to reflect these intersections and encourage a broader range of responses, and we further recommending expanding the policy to include the needs of criminalized survivors and justice-involved survivors. We've been doing a lot of work in the city in partnership with many of you to further support criminalized survivors, and we would encourage OPDV to ensure that the protocol reflects encouraging that work. Thank you for the opportunity to share our perspective. I went way over time, I apologize. We look forward to collaborating with all of you and with our survivors to ensure the model policy reflects current best practices and best supports survivors on their pathway to safety and healing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Looks like we only have a few more folks. Next up, we have Simone Jingour, co-director of Jahaji.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Simone Jingour, and I'm the Executive Director of Jahaji, an Indo-Caribbean gender justice organization based in Queens. The Model Domestic Violence Policy for counties has not been formally updated since 1998. That means for nearly 3 decades, the systems survivors interact with have been out of step with the realities they face today, especially immigrant, diasporic, and LGBTQ+ survivors. So much has shifted since 1998. Technology has created entirely new avenues for abuse, from digital surveillance to impersonation, threats through immigration portals, and financial control through apps. The social fabric of how we exist and how abuse shows up has fundamentally changed. The updated policy must include expanded definitions of domestic violence, including coercive control and technology-facilitated abuse. Updating this policy is essential to ensuring that every county system, from human services to police to courts, is survivor-centered, trauma-informed, and culturally responsive. Through our work at Jahaji, we see how system gaps have real consequences. Survivors are misidentified as aggressors. Immigrant survivors fear seeking help because of status, sponsorship, or pressure from extended family networks. Survivors are re-traumatized when they must repeat their story across multiple agencies. Access to culturally competent support, especially for LGBTQ+ survivors and new migrants, is inconsistent. Police response and misidentification remain major issues in our communities. Indo-Caribbean and Caribbean survivors, particularly queer, trans, and Black survivors, are disproportionately misidentified as the primary aggressor. We need clearer protocols and stronger training rooted in coercive control, cultural dynamics, and the specific patterns of immigrant households. And because some survivors cannot safely call 911, we also need non-law enforcement pathways for reporting and support. At Jahaji, we also prioritize prevention, especially with youth. We use arts and culture to bring young people into community spaces where they can talk openly about consent, boundaries, and what healthy relationships look like. Prevention must be understood as central to safety, not optional. And what we see every day is that culturally specific, community-rooted organizations like ours are often the first points of trust for survivors. The model policy must recognize these partnerships as essential.
Hi everyone, my name is Lakshmi. I'm the Strategy and Member Program Lead at Jahaji. I work directly with survivors and lead our advocacy programs. Across our communities, survivors face layered and unique challenges. Fear of deportation, sponsorship retaliation, or child removal prevents many from reaching out. Misidentification by police or courts can escalate harm instead of preventing it. Being forced to retell trauma to multiple agencies re-traumatizes survivors and discourages them from continuing to seek help. And we carry the weight of real losses. Earlier this year, our community lost Salisha Ali, a young Indo-Caribbean woman, to gender-based violence. Salisha came here from Trinidad, hoping for a better life, and was killed by the very man who sponsored her immigration. Her story sits at the intersection of gender-based violence, immigration vulnerability, and community silence. It reveals how systems designed to protect immigrant women can instead trap them, making it harder to leave abusive relationships or seek safety without fear of retaliation or deportation. We hold Salisha's memory as a call to action, to build systems rooted not in punishment or surveillance, but in healing, safety, and collective accountability. At Jahaji, we know that the real systems change really begins with healing justice. We understand that trauma, it's political, that survival, community care, and organizing are deeply connected, and our work is not only about stopping that violence, it's about transforming the conditions that allow violence to take root. We see that every day, that economic violence and abuse and housing insecurity are among the biggest barriers for immigrant survivors, and without access to stable housing, work authorization, or income, leaving becomes almost impossible. And so through organizations like Jahaji, survivors are able to disclose abuse safely and receive support that is tailored to their cultural, linguistic, and community context. When survivors feel seen and understood, they are far more likely to engage in safety planning and seek protection. I'm going to go over just a little bit here. We urge that the updated model policy, similarly to other folks who've spoken already, formalize partnerships with culturally specific organizations, ensuring consistent referrals and warm handoffs, strengthen cross-system accountability and collaboration, including between agencies and within community-based partners, and embed trauma-informed, survivor-centered practices across all systems and points of contact. Ensure cultural competence in training and evaluation, including diaspora communities, LGBTQ+ survivors, disabled survivors, and immigrant households, and expand housing access, especially for survivors whose immigrant status limits their options. And I'll just pass it to Simone to close us out very quickly.
In short, survivors need systems that are safe, accessible, coordinated, and culturally responsive. Updating the model policy is an urgent opportunity to build systems that actually meet the needs of survivors, especially those pushed to the margins. Jahaji stands ready to partner with counties and state agencies to ensure the policy reflects the lived experiences of the communities we serve. Thank you for creating space for these critical perspectives.
Thank you both.
Next we'll have Maritza Rico, Policy and Advocacy Manager with New Destiny Housing.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me. And it's good to see a lot of partners in the room. The reason I'm here is to speak about housing, which is what a lot of partners have spoken about today. Domestic violence is the leading cause for family homelessness in New York City, and for over 30 years, New Destiny has been leading the charge to help survivors find housing and long-term safety to break the intergenerational cycle of abuse and homelessness. We are the only organization in New York that is solely focused on permanent housing solutions for survivors. New Destiny is also the largest provider of supportive housing for New Yorkers impacted by domestic violence across the state, and we operate the biggest and longest running rapid rehousing program for survivors in New York City. Access to safe and affordable housing is one of survivors' biggest and most urgent concerns, and often determines whether a person leaves their abuser and stays alive. Without housing, it is impossible for survivors to address the long-lasting physical and mental health consequences of abuse. With so little affordable housing available to homeless domestic violence survivors are more likely to move from shelter to shelter instead of housing. Between 2018 and 2024, more than half of survivors who left HRA domestic violence emergency shelters went to another shelter upon reaching the state-mandated 180-day limit. Of the little under 2,500 survivor-led households who exited emergency domestic violence shelter in 2024, only 9% of them, or 225 households, moved to a permanent home. The 1998 model for counties, while outdated in significant ways, provides an excellent opportunity for New York State to coordinate resources in service of survivors. Its guiding principles lay the groundwork for critical interventions in service provision for survivors as they navigate the state and local criminal justice, legal, and judicial systems, as well as healthcare, welfare, and education systems. Generally, New Destiny believes that the model should use a survivor-centered approach in its language and design, and separate abuser accountability and its related activities from the framework of domestic violence service provision. We also recommend that the document refrain from generalizing based on gender and encourage OPDV to use data to guide the updates and make precise statements about the demographic of those who are most affected by domestic violence, while not erasing the experiences of those in the minority. New Destiny highly recommends the inclusion of housing among the core systems in the provision of services for domestic violence survivors. As I've spoken to today, and many of our partners have as well, affordable and safe housing is a critical component in the long-term stability for survivors. So far this fiscal year, we have served over 1,100 clients through our housing and I skipped ahead. Let me just say, as of this fall, New Destiny Housing is housing close to 1,500 adults and children in our supportive housing buildings. This is our permanent housing, 99.8% of which have remained violence-free. And through our Housing Access and Stability Services program, which operates out of the 5 New York City Family Justice Centers, we provide navigation help, temporary rental assistance, and supportive services to promote long-term stability for survivors. And that is the 1,100 clients that we've supported. And out of this batch of clients, 98% of them have remained stably housed, and 95 have been violence-free. Finding housing is extremely challenging for survivors, especially in New York City, where the housing vacancy rate has fallen below 1.4%. So now more than ever, the state needs to prioritize systems coordination to ensure that survivors are finding safe homes fast.
The new iteration of the manual must outline housing coordination between county and state social service agencies, shelter providers, affordable housing developers, supportive housing operators, domestic violence service providers, and all other entities involved in domestic violence response across the state. Linkages between these often siloed systems need to be assessed and revised to expedite the process so that survivors can leave their abusers without having to undergo a traumatic and prolonged shelter stay or get stuck in affordable housing limbo for years. As experts in housing solutions for survivors, New Destiny looks forward to partnering with OPDV in designing a framework that considers the many players and intricate arrangements in place to house survivors. We can do so much better as a city and a state to make these systems more responsive to the lived experiences of survivors. It is not acceptable, for instance, that in New York City, many survivors are left out of housing and homelessness plans, and therefore administrative planning systems and service models simply because they have a separate shelter system. Or that the city leaves out single survivors out of accessing city-funded supportive housing resources. It is also not acceptable that the state's investment into permanent housing solutions that help survivors are made in a patchwork of ways that leave legacy systems funded at suboptimal rates and draw lines in quality and service provisions between programs. To improve any of these systems, there needs to be a wide-reaching assessment of the issues and ways our current system functions or dysfunctions. We remain committed partners to OPDV and all state and city agencies in keeping our system survivor-centered and trauma-informed, as well as ensuring that we effectively address all aspects of survivors' needs, including housing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And next up, we have Samantha Cardenas, Senior Director of Government Affairs at the Urban Resource Institute.
Hi everyone, good evening now. Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to provide feedback on the Model Domestic Violence Policy for counties. My name is Samantha Cardenas, Senior Director of Government Affairs for the Urban Resource Institute. URI is the largest provider of domestic violence shelter services in the country and a leading provider of transitional housing for families experiencing homelessness. We have begun to expand our housing to include supportive, deeply affordable, permanent housing for survivors of domestic violence, their families, and their pets. Domestic violence is the single largest driver of family homelessness in the city. As such, it is vital that any state policy includes the critical role that temporary and supportive housing plays in ensuring the survivors of violence and their families can access safety. URI commends OPDV for revisiting model domestic violence policy for counties and creating space to reflect on the evolution of understanding of gender-based violence since 1998. Our hope is the policy will become a living framework that adapts to and reflects the current mores, changed attitude, and more comprehensive understanding about gender-based and domestic violence. First, URI believes the policy needs to reinforce the critical importance of trauma-informed, client-centered care to survivors and their family. A comprehensive definition of trauma-informed care should be at the center of the policy's guiding principles to advise the work of service providers and ensure the safety of survivors and their family. Trauma-informed care places survivors at the center of all decisions. It stresses safety and autonomy and requires that care be rooted in cultural sensitivity. It also requires that we actively include survivors' voices to inform and lead discussions regarding policy developments and service delivery. That should be true for the update of this policy. Second, language matters, both in the way we talk about those who have caused harm and those who have experienced harm, as well as access to culturally relevant languages. The model policy should adopt gender-inclusive and survivor-centered language throughout. The word victim should be changed to survivor, abuser to the person who has caused harm. Referring to the harmed as survivors rather than victims promotes resilience and empowerment. Similarly, referring to people who cause harm as such acknowledges accountability without reinforcing stereotypes. Domestic violence affects people of all gender identities and sexual orientations, and we hope the updated policy will reflect such. While individuals who identify as women are statistically more likely to experience harm at the hands of the male-identified partner, the language in the policy should reflect the fact that all people, regardless of gender,
can and do experience violence. This policy is designed to address that violence regardless of the gender of the parties involved. Cultural and linguistic accessibility is essential. I want to uplift Caribbean Equality Project and several of the other organizations who are here. Survivors are more likely to seek help when services are culturally competent and language access is guaranteed. New York is home to over 800 languages with immigrant communities in every county, and we must account for this. Third, prevention as a means to reduce violence. The model policy as it exists is reactive in nature and takes effect only after a domestic violence incident has occurred. In addition to focusing on providing survivors with access to safety and support following a violent incident, it must also provide guidance on the significance of prevention. Investing in primary prevention, particularly community and school-based youth violence prevention programs, has the potential to stop violence before it begins. The model policy spends significant time on abuser accountability, but expressly and inappropriately prohibits the use of abusive partner intervention programs in almost any setting. The model policy highlights punitive responses to gender-based violence, which alone has proven insufficient to reduce domestic violence and increase safety for survivors, as seen in New York City and New York State based on data on domestic violence fatalities and felony assaults. Research has shown that people who cause harm have experienced trauma. This does not excuse violent behavior, it explains it, and it provides clinicians with a basis from which to provide trauma-informed accountability work, which has preliminarily been shown to reduce recidivism. APIP is an opportunity to keep survivors safe, particularly when coupled with other law enforcement interventions. Fourth, there was another animal-inclusive shelter provider. Safe shelter access for families must include all family members, including pets. URI became the first provider of pet-inclusive shelter in New York City after we learned that 50% of survivors reported that they would not leave the dangerous situation if they had to leave their pet behind. Fifth and finally, URI recommends integrating animal welfare systems into the policy and formalizing collaboration with agencies and local societies for the prevention of cruelty to animals, municipal shelter systems, and the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets and the animal welfare law enforcement officers. Animal abuse is often a precursor to severe violence within the home and should trigger screenings and intervention similar to child abuse. Revisiting the model domestic policy for counties is an opportunity to build a framework that reflects dignity, inclusivity, and safety for all New Yorkers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Melissa Halpern with Voice of Women.
Good evening, and thank you for holding the space for policy recommendations from both survivors themselves and advocates in the field who are doing this work. My name is Melissa Halpern. I sit on the steering committee for Voices of Women. I'm a first-year MSW student at NYU Silver School of Social Work, a clinical intern serving single-parent families who are overwhelmingly survivors of abuse at Help USA DHS shelter. I'm the facilitator of a survivor expressive arts group at Barrier for Living's domestic violence shelter, Freedom House, and I'm also a survivor of the digital evolution of intimate partner violence. I want to lift up a form of post-separation violence that New York's model policy has not yet fully addressed: tech-facilitated abuse. In my own life, my calls were intercepted, emails vanished, evidence disappeared. Domestic violence resources stopped showing up in my Google search results. What looked like phone glitches were actually forms of digital coercive control. Remote access, account takeover, stalkerware, and evidence wiped from a distance. When survivors bring these patterns to the police, they are not met with investigation, they are met with suspicion. Many are told there isn't enough to make a report. Some are warned that if they come back again, officers will order an ambulance and send their survivor for a psychiatric evaluation. For a survivor already in crisis, that isn't neutrality, that is state-reinforced silencing. It makes the system feel indistinguishable from the abuser. In my current advocacy work and through participation on New York's Cyber Abuse Task Force, a coalition created because law enforcement's current approach leaves survivors unprotected, I see every day. Over 300 attorneys, technologists, and advocates show up to compensate for the absence of a real system response. If NYPD had consistent protocols, trauma-informed training, or dedicated digital forensics for DV cases, then the task force would not need to exist at this scale. We do have programs like Cornell's Clinic to End Tech Abuses partnership with the Family Justice Centers, and their staff does heroic work, but they will tell you themselves they can only provide surface-level support, password resets, general safety tips. They cannot confirm or remove advanced stalkerware. They cannot conduct forensic triage when a survivor loses control of their devices. They were not meant to replace a system that should be responding, but certainly isn't. To understand how devastating this is, imagine a survivor who has finally found the courage to leave. She moves into shelter, her phone looks normal, but calls still won't connect. Her browser crashes every time she tries to search domestic violence services. Screenshots of injuries disappear from her photo roll. Her emails to her case manager never arrive. She tries to report this to police, but instead of protection, she is told that if she returns asking for help again, they will send her to psychiatry. In that moment, the state steps into the abuser's shoes, not metaphorically, functionally. She is isolated, discredited, terrified, and technologically trapped. Without a working device, she cannot apply for benefits, communicate with ACS, attend remote therapy, file court petitions, or document harm. In 2025, digital access is losing the ability to survive. This gap is not a technical inconvenience. It is a public safety emergency. And without statewide standards, we are inadvertently training survivors to stay silent. New York needs a clear, trauma-informed, survivor-informed digital safety framework built into its model policy. Mandatory training for law enforcement on recognizing technological coercive control. A statewide evidence preservation protocol for digitally compromised devices. Minimum tech safety guidelines for DV programs. And accountability measures for officers who dismiss or pathologize survivors reporting tech abuse. We also need infrastructure, a digital abuse response unit staffed with an analyst capable of triaging compromised devices within 24 hours, a device replacement voucher program for services on public assistance, and a publicly funded cyber DV legal unit so low-income survivors have equal protection. This isn't a theoretical failure. Survivors are being hunted through their devices right now. They deserve a model policy that reflects the realities of modern violence, not just the parts that fit neatly into old frameworks. I would be grateful to support OPDV's work in this area as someone who brings practitioner experience, lived experience, and direct involvement in statewide cyber abuse coalition. Survivors deserve a system that protects them, not one that inadvertently replicates the dynamics they fought to escape. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, our next speaker will be Mohammed Q. Amin, Executive Director of the Caribbean Equality Project.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share remarks on what needs to be changed. I first want to thank all the partners for identifying LGBTQ survivors in your remarks. My name is Mohammed Q. Amin. I'm the Executive Director of Caribbean Equality Project, an immigrants' rights organization that empowers, advocates for, and represents Afro and Indo-Caribbean LGBTQ immigrants in New York City. For a decade, the organization has focused on advocacy for LGBTQ and immigrants' rights, gender equity, racial justice, immigration, and mental health services through public education, community organizing, civic engagement, storytelling, and social programming to end hate violence. New York is home to the largest Caribbean foreign-born population, many of whom who live in Caribbean-centric neighborhoods like Richmond Hill and South Ozone Park in Queens, Flatbush and Crown Heights in Brooklyn, Castle Hill and Wakefield in the Bronx, Rochester and Schenectady. The Caribbean LGBTQ Immigrants Caribbean Equality Project serves face unique challenges and inequity in accessing gender and intimate partner violence resources, and healing should not be one of them. Many of the barriers queer Caribbeans encounter are rooted in ancestral trauma, recovering from post-colonization, LGBTQ-related phobias within faith-based institutions and diaspora communities, HIV stigma, and a lack of access to culturally responsive mental health services and racism. Many of our community members have been abandoned and rejected by their families, fleeing from prosecution from their home countries, and escaping death threats, employment and housing discrimination, and anti-LGBTQ violence and isolation, including a lack of resources for survivors of sexual violence. LGBTQ immigrants experiencing gender-based violence face unique challenges and layered obstacles because of their intersecting identity, cultural backgrounds, and vulnerabilities within both the immigration and LGBTQ systems in New York. These issues include the risk of deportation from abusive partners, language barriers, discrimination by law enforcement and service providers, and limited access to culturally appropriate care and advocacy. Achieving equitable care requires a policy framework that acknowledges these risks and emphasizes both cultural responsiveness and legal protections for survivors. Gender-based violence disproportionately impacts transgender New Yorkers, who are more likely to experience violent crime, sexual assault, and intimate partner violence than cisgender people. Factors such as discrimination, immigration status, harassment, and a lack of access to resources like healthcare, economic independence, and accurate identification documents contribute to this vulnerability. Tragically, fatal violence also disproportionately affects Black and transgender women of color, including immigrants. Government agencies and funding bodies must address these gaps by investing in comprehensive, culturally competent services tailored to LGBTQ immigrant survivors affected by gender-based and intimate partner violence. This investment would include dedicated funding streams supporting affirming emergency housing, multilingual interpretation services, and trauma-informed legal advocacy. Policymakers should expand and enforce non-discrimination protections and ensure access to public benefits regardless of immigration status, and remove barriers that excludes LGBTQ survivors from safety net resources and pathways to healing. Best practices call for a collaboration with trusted community organizations such as Caribbean Equality Project and many of our partners who are in the room today that reflect the lived experiences and cultural needs of LGBTQ immigrants. Service providers must be required and funded to develop culturally specific programs, train staff in anti-bias and trauma-informed approaches, and provide confidential, accessible support that honors the unique risk and resilience of Afro and Indo-Caribbean survivors. Policy efforts should also focus on removing systematic obstacles in law enforcement and immigration law that survivors feel safe in accessing support and seeking justice. Prioritizing culturally responsive care, robust legal protections, and equitable resources allocation will fundamentally improve outcomes for LGBTQ immigrant survivors of gender-based and intimate partner violence. Through these commitments, policymakers and funders can advance human rights, protect social justice, and promote social justice, and help build safe, inclusive communities where all survivors, regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, or immigration status, are empowered to recover, thrive, and heal, and lead dignified lives. I want to close by also saying it's been over 27 years since this policy has been updated. It was only 2002 that sexual orientation was added as a protected class in New York State, and most recently, gender identity was protected in 2024 with the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment. I really urge you all to make sure that LGBTQ survivors, more specifically LGBTQ immigrant survivors, are not only protected and resourced in your policy making, but organizations that lead and protect these communities are also funded. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was the last speaker on our list. I just want to make sure we haven't missed anybody that still wishes to speak.
Thank you, everybody. You have OPDV's commitment to be inclusive and to be transparent and to, like I said at the beginning, this is going to be a long process, but not too long because there is a sense of urgency. clearly, after how many years. So if you are interested in working together, please see any one of us and drop off your card as we proceed through this process. And we are going to hang out a few minutes if you have other stuff you want to bring to us. But I can't thank all of you enough. I can't thank the survivors enough for coming and using their voices today. They're so important to how we build a new system. So thank you all so very, very much.